Good evening and welcome. I am Terry Kay of the Jewish Grandparents Network. Tonight we have another webinar in the Family Room Live series. It's called Grandparents Bring Your Family Seder to Life with our wonderful presenter, Jonathan Shmidt Chapman. First, before I introduce Jonathan, I am going to show you for one moment the Family Room. Which is an online space for you, for our grandparents, to bring Jewish culture and values and traditions to experiences that we provide for you and to enrich your Jewish family life. I'm going to show you one new post in the Family Room, one new experience. It's in the arts section. Click on this guitar. And we recently posted it. It's called Creative Art with Your Grandchild, Embrace the Temporary, written by the most wonderful creative Jewish educator, Rabbi Emily Meyer. And Emily shows us how we can, with our grandchildren, do temporary art with found objects, perhaps in our back garden, and with paper cutting with recycled paper, and so on. In other words, art that we don't have to hang on our refrigerator door. So during the course of our evening, I will post a link to the Family Room so you can go and try it out by yourself, and we hope you enjoy it. Just a quick word that the Family Room experiences are asynchronous, meaning you do them in your own time when it suits you and your family. To tonight's event, welcome everybody. We are thrilled that you joined us. We are in webinar format, which means that your video and your camera, and your audio are off, you're on mute. Having said that, we urge you and we welcome your questions. We would love to have your questions. Jonathan will be taking them throughout. And so just type those into the chat bar, if you would. Let me introduce our presenter tonight. Jonathan Shmidt Chapman is an internationally recognized artist and educator in the field of theater for young audiences in Jewish education. He is the recipient of the Jewish Education Project's 2020 Young Pioneers Award for Innovation. Jonathan is the co-creator and co-founder of Kailu Kits, which he's going to show us later. These are audio adventures that bring Jewish holiday stories to life at home. And he's also the creator of Play Along Parsha, which is a weekly activities to do with your young children at home through creative play, all about the Torah portion. Again, I will post that link in chat. Jonathan lives in New York with his husband and his 4-year-old son. May I turn it over to you, Jonathan?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction, Terry, and for the invitation to be here. I'm honored to present today and get to present and play with you and talk about bringing the Seder to life with your grandchildren. I'm going to share my screen to make this as visual as possible. So you should be able to see my slides now. I will go in and out of slide sharing through the presentation. Just a quick word about Zoom. You should be able to change the view feature to be able to see me bigger or smaller and the slides bigger or smaller, so you can adjust your own view. You can also make sure, I'll be asking you to put things in the chat today. Just make sure that you select all participants rather than just host and panelists so that everybody can see your what you write in the chat. And with that, let's get started. So today we're going to be talking about the Seder, bringing the Seder to life. As Terry mentioned, my passion is connecting the dots between the performing arts and Jewish education. So we're going to be talking today about activating the Seder and the Passover Story through theatrical play, hopefully with easy to activate techniques and strategies that you can bring to the Seder table this year, whether you're in person or virtually. So I know that you got an email about this in advance, but just to say, if you want to play along at home for certain sections of this webinar, even though it is a webinar format, I'm imagining all of us in a room together, and I'll be sharing things that you can try at home. So if you want to grab a cup or a small bowl, a cloth napkin or a towel, a tissue, a few sheets of paper, a piece of tape, which I don't think I put in the email in advance, and a flashlight, which it could be your phone. So if you want to take a moment to grab those things, if you don't have them, it's totally fine. You can try it later. I'll be demonstrating. But if you'd like to do it at home to make it more active rather than just watching me, feel free. Okay. So today we're going to do a quick warm up. We're going to talk about the Passover story and remembering the story so that we have the ability to tell it and bring it to life to your grandchildren. I want to give a special shout out to my son's grandparents, Mark, Mady, Diana, and Howard, who are all listening in today. Very excited to share this with them as well. I'm going to offer activities to bring each of the moments of the story that we talk about to life, with giving you a bunch of ideas that, of course, can be adapted for different age groups and different ways that you might want to use them. We'll reflect on that. I'll take some questions that you have, and then I'll share, as Terry mentioned, a resource for you called Kailu Kits, which is a way to bring the story to life through an audio adventure at home. So,
Can I interrupt you for one moment? I'm so sorry. I was rather rude and I didn't introduce my colleague, David Raphael. What? David is, you can see him on screen, David is the co-founder and CEO of the Jewish Grandparents Network and my very, very dear colleague and someone I respect enormously. Back to you, Jonathan. Sorry for the interruption.
No, of course. Thank you. Welcome. So the first thing I'm going to ask you to do, just for yourself, is think of a special or vivid Passover Seder memory that you have. Try to recall it. It could be from your childhood. It could be recent. It could be as a participant or as a host. But any memory that you have connected to a Passover Seder, one that you can recall vividly that is a special memory, and try to think about what made that experience memorable. And when you have that memory, I welcome you to drop those into the chat just so we can see some of those and share them with everybody who is here tonight. So Terry offered about adult kids ecstatic at finding the afikomen and the fun of the search. Bethany, the Chagad Yaz sing off. Susan offering the 4 questions in Yiddish. These are great. Making commercials for different pieces of the Seder from Amy. Multi-generational fun together. Amazing. So thank you for filling the space with these. Keep offering them. This is what we're talking about tonight, right? We're talking about how to make the Seder memorable and creating vivid memories for your grandchildren so that they will share these hopefully as they grow older, and thinking about how to make it really meaningful and impactful. So I believe that one of the best ways that we can do this is activating the Seder through play and through storytelling. At the centerpiece of our Passover Seder is the Passover story. And there's a lot of other things that we do, a lot of rituals that we do, but at the centerpiece is this magid, is this retelling of the Exodus story. And we have this tradition of Kailu hu yatsa mitzrayim, that we're supposed to experience the story as if we ourselves went out of Egypt. So take a moment to think about that concept. What does that mean? How do we offer that to children and young people? This idea of imagining ourselves in the story. And so tonight I invite us to think about not just hearing the story, right? Not just telling it verbally, but thinking about the ways that we can really activate it for our grandchildren so that they feel like we are experiencing the story in a multisensory way. And in that way, we create really impactful memories. There's a whole body of research, arts education research, that shows that when we learn a story through play, physically, kinesthetically, through our senses, we actually create deeper memories and deeper social bonding with those around us. So that's what we're drawing upon tonight. And it's clearly also a Jewish tradition of thinking about, Passovers are really one of our most theatrical holidays. The Passover Seder is ritualized through sensory engagement. We're bringing the story to life, as we'll talk about, and actually doing things. We're eating things and smelling things to make us recall the Exodus story. So let's try to remember it. Some of you may be very familiar with the Passover story. Others maybe sort of remember parts of it. And the Haggadah doesn't often always help us, in that the Haggadah, many traditional Haggadot are written as commentary on the story, kind of assuming we already know it. And for many of us, it's not as vivid. So take a moment to try to recall the Passover story, whatever you remember, and try to distill it down to 5 key moments. And this exercise might be even easier if you think about it as 5 images or objects. If you had to tell the Passover story in 5 objects, what would those 5 objects be? Distilling down the most essentials of the story for you in your mind. And I'm going to give you 1 minute to do that. So think about it. You can jot it down on a piece of paper or on your computer, but try to distill the story down for yourself into 5 images or objects. And once you have some of those, if you want to drop some of those images or objects into the chat, just so we can see what everybody's thinking about. Great question, Susan. So Kailu actually means as if. It's part of that phrase, Kailu hu yatsa mitzrayim, as if you yourself went out of Egypt. I kind of think about it as that imaginative, as if, thinking about something and manifesting it imaginatively. Okay, so we've got the shank bone, the 4 cups of wine, matzah. So slaves, baby Moses, meeting with Pharaoh, Exodus, freedom. Great. We got the arc of the story in those 5 images. Yes, the burning bush. Gary says pyramids, plagues, blood on the doorpost, parting of the sea. David's got a wicker basket, a burning bush, the 10 commandments, and the pyramids. These are great. And everyone's are slightly different. Some of them have similar components. Others bring in, parts of the story that resonate for them that you might not be thinking about. Some people are thinking about the actual objects on the, the Seder table versus the kind of objects that represent the story. Wonderful. So I'm going to offer you my 5. They might be overlapping yours, they might be different, but I find this exercise helpful because it begins to distill down the essentials. How do we think about and remember the story so we can convey it? And ideally, telling parts of the story, not looking down at a Haggadah, but actually telling the story to your grandchildren at the table. Obviously, having a reference or a great Haggadah to follow is fantastic, but how can we bring it to life so we're not looking down at something, but we're interacting with each other? So my 5. A basket floating on the Nile, sandals running through the desert, Moses' sandals as he runs away from Egypt, a burning bush in the wilderness, Moses' staff raised in the air, used for many things that we'll talk about, and then Miriam's tambourine as the people dance through the crossing of the Red Sea, the parted sea. So again, some overlap in the ones that you have. I'm going to use these as a frame today for the different moments that we'll talk about. And obviously there are a lot of moments in the story within this. So let's just quickly review so that we're all on the same page. So a baby is in a basket and the baby floats down the river, the Nile River in Egypt. How did he get there? Who is he? He's found by Pharaoh's daughter and raised in the palace, and she names him Moses. Now, you notice in the way that I tell this version, I would use this version for a younger child because it leads with mystery rather than tragedy. It doesn't lead with the scary nature of the story as we know it, of the boys being thrown into the river and Pharaoh's decree. You could choose to go there if you'd like to. In my experience, we start, especially with the younger kids. My son came home from his preschool today. he's 5, and they were already covering the angel of death, which I was like, oh, okay. I'm not sure I would have gone there with him yet, but we had a conversation about it. But yeah, I as an introductory component of the story, that you can lead with the mystery of who's this baby, how did he get there? And for older kids, you can go into more of the detail of the family putting him in the basket and sending him down the Nile to safety, or to protect him. Okay. So as Moses grows up, he sees that Pharaoh is forcing the Israelites to build buildings for him, working in the hot sun with no break. Moses thinks that Pharaoh is not being fair, and he decides to run away from Egypt. In the wilderness, Moses finds a burning bush, and the voice from inside the bush, also God's voice, tells him that he is an Israelite. He must go back to Egypt and convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go and lead them out to be free. He returns to Egypt and tells Pharaoh to let my people go. Pharaoh says no. After a bunch of wild stuff happens in Egypt to convince him to change his mind, Pharaoh finally agrees to let the people go. They pack up and leave so fast, they don't even let their bread finish baking. This is one of the reasons we eat matzah. So you'll notice here that I don't lean into the plagues. Again, with very young kids, I think that this is not an essential component of the story, that you can address it without going into the detail. And for older kids, you can go into more detail. You know, it was mentioned in many of the vivid memories, and I have mixed feelings about this. I was also a kid who acted out the plagues and wore plague masks or silly things around the plagues. As an adult parent, I have some discomfort around it. It's something that a horrible thing happened to the Egyptian people. We traditionally take wine out of our wine glass, in memory of the plagues. And especially the 10th plague, it's very challenging to talk about with a very young child. So I have told this story with younger kids, talking about the crazy things that happen in Egypt, like the frogs jumping or the water turning red, or kind of mentioning them to get to the means to the end of convincing Pharaoh to change his mind. And then obviously you can go into more detail with older kids, but that you don't have to stay there with a younger child. Just a personal preference. And then across the sea, on the way out of Egypt, the people come to the Red Sea. They can't get across, but with God's help, a miracle happens. The sea splits into walls, and the people can cross through the dry path to the other side. They sing and dance through the path, and they are finally free. So thank you for indulging me as we, just to make sure we remember the story. So as we go through these activities, you have those images in your head before we dive a little deeper. So let's go through each of those moments and talk about some ways that you can bring them to life theatrically. So this first one, the basket on the Nile. I'm going to ask if you have your small cup, that you grab it, and your tissue. So this is something that you can make together with your grandchild. It could be a craft before the Seder, it could be during, but you can basically put that tissue in the cup and imagine that this is the basket with Moses inside. This is something that if you want to design it or create it as a craft, it's a great thing to do prior to the Seder. You build that prop and then you have it. And then you can take either a napkin or a towel. It could be the napkins that everybody has at the table. You could also use like a table runner. And so one thing you can do first is have everybody hold up their napkin and create the Nile. So you can use your towel, Terry, and try to get some movement out of it. You can use something called Soundscape, which is basically everybody at the table making the sound of the Nile. So, shh. You can even put it on your arm so that you can hold the basket in the other hand and float it down the Nile. And if you move it really slowly, you can kind of puppeteer it, right? You can use it as a puppet. It brings the whole focus of the table to this object, and you can pass it around the table. So you can say, we're going to get Moses safely around the Nile. We're all going to guide him and help Miriam. So you can pass it from one person to the next around the table. With older children, you could even add I'm going to whisper something into the basket. I'm going to whisper a wish for Moses, or, so each person does that as it goes around. And it's a communal activity that immediately paints an image, right? We see the image happening at our Seder table. If you wanted to also, you can use your napkins and connect them across the table to create a Nile. So you're passing it across and the table itself becomes your landscape. If you want to get fancy, I also, you can get one of these online. So this is like a miniature basket. There's like a, from a doll collection if you wanted to, and then you have actual ones to float if you wanted to, but I also like the cup and making your own and imagining it. Okay. Here are some images just to give visual reference to the children we're talking about. So you can see some different examples. You see the miniature basket on a table runner in that top image, a paper puppet of the basket on the bottom left, and then a larger one with a stuffed animal that you can put inside to represent Moses. There's also the sensory connection to the Seder. So we do things in the Seder that you can connect to the story, right? At the beginning of the Seder, we wash our hands and we dip the karpas into the salt water. These are moments of water, right? So you can say, let's wash our hands, imagining like as Miriam putting her hands in the Nile as we send the basket on the Nile River. Let's float our karpas across the water. And for older kids, talking about the salt water as the tears, as the parents let Moses go on the Nile, hoping that he would be safe. These are not, necessarily the reasons we do these things in the Seder, but they're connection points that you can make to the ritual of the Seder and the story to kind of connect the memory and to give us a multi-sensory connection to the story parts that we're telling. Okay, so moving on to the next part of the story, building Egypt at our table. So the next part of our story is Moses realizing that the Israelites are working for Pharaoh. Pharaoh is, has made them slaves. One thing you can try either before your Seder or during is creating the buildings at your Seder table using matzah. So you can actually use them as a material. If you wanted to, you can use the charoset as the mortar. Totally messy, but if you lay something down the table, if you're willing to go there, it's super fun. And everybody can build their own, especially with older kids, kind of a building activity to create a whole landscape of Egypt on your table using the materials of the Seder. If you want, you can also use Legos or other building blocks. Kinetic sand, this is something your grandchildren might have. It's a great play material. It's non-messy sand, and you can mold it into the shape of buildings or pyramids. So, this is something where you could show a reference image of ancient Egypt to say, what do you see in the photo and how do we build that at our table? So you're basically building a small map, around the table, almost like as a miniature building or set design activity to imagine and create the landscape. Once you have that, you can also, again, a kind of a puppeteering moment like we did with the basket, use your fingers to create Moses's running feet. And you can, make him tired, make him jump, make him run. And then from each person, you can run him around the table. Again, the fancier version, you can find these online, very cheap. They're little feet. You can see them here. So they go on your finger and you can use them to walk. But again, you don't need them. You can just use your fingers. And again, it becomes a moment where you pass it around the table. Everybody is helping Moses run away from Egypt and into the wilderness. And here's some images just to give you some connection to what we're talking about. That top image is the kinetic sand. And you can see I found some molds, small plastic molds of pyramids that you can use with the kinetic sand if you wanted to. And then the bottom, an image of Legos. Again, we've got this sensory connection, right? We break the middle matzah. And so if you've used it to construct your pyramids, the sound of the breaking, imagining the breaking of the backs of the Israelites, the breaking of the building materials. Obviously, we make the korech sandwich using the charoset, which represents the mortar. So as you get to these parts of the Seder, you're recalling the story that as we're telling it. All right. Okay, our burning bush. So I'm going to ask you to take your piece of paper, if you have it in front of you, and your pen. And on your piece of paper, you can draw the shape of a fire or a burning bush if you'd like. As much of if you feel inclined to really design, great, there's an image of one on the screen. You could also just draw the shape of fire. Let me show you an example. so that I'm just doing a simple drawing of a flame. I have here, just an orange marker, but you don't necessarily need one. You can, this is, again, a craft that you can do with your grandchild in advance of the Seder as a way to prep materials that you then use. So I filled it in. And then what you can do is tape it like a cone. So you're going to wrap it around like a cylinder and put a piece of tape there. So here I have a completed one right here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to turn on my iPhone flashlight. I don't think it's going to show on Zoom, but I'm going to try to show you in the dark here. And if you light it up from the bottom, the whole thing glows. And you can't tell on my screen right now, but if you could see it in person, you'd see that the image I drew is lit up. And we create a burning bush lantern. I'll show you a photo of it in just a moment. The other thing that we can do is create the burning bush with shadows. So I'm going to take my flashlight just from my iPhone. And again, your grandchildren may have magnetiles. So magnetiles are a great building tool, but they're also, see-through and colorful. This could also be cellophane, but I took an orange magnetile. I'm putting it over the flashlight. And so I can create on the back here with my fingers, now the orange flame. And this could be something
Jonathan,
you do on the wall.
Excuse me interrupting you. We have a request from one of our participants that perhaps you could stop sharing your screen when you're making objects. That would be great. Thank you.
Perfect idea. Yeah, perfect. Okay, sorry about that.
Show us that again.
Yeah, so basically what I did, I just took my iPhone flashlight against a white surface. I'm taking an orange, magnetile, but again, this could be like cellophane, something that's clear. And you put it over the flashlight. So in my room, it looks very orange. On the screen, you can't really tell because of the glare of the computer. And then if you put up your hands, you can have everybody create the flame and make the sound of the flame. You go closer, it gets bigger. And this is something that everybody can do on the wall. If you turn off the lights, and again, you create the kind of magic moment of the burning bush visually as something that completely transforms the room with something very simple trick. Okay. Sorry, I missed that in the chat. Thank you for uplifting that. Okay. Going back into slides just to show you another way to do this too. If you grab tin foil and you shake it, that creates the sound, a kind of a sound almost like thunder, but you can use that again to create soundscape around the room. Simple things to, theatrically build that moment. And then here's the image of it. So when you light it up, you can see the fire on the picture you drew lit up just from the iPhone, and it looks really great in the dark. And it's something you could put at the center of the table as you're telling that part of the story. Okay, so the Let My People Go moment is a fun one to have as a role play moment. So either the kids as Moses and the grown-ups as Pharaoh, or sometimes even more fun in reverse, the grown-ups as Moses and the kids as Pharaoh, going back and forth around asking, let my people go, and Pharaoh saying no, and it getting more and more heated and intense. And this is something that you could do at the table or standing up back and forth. Another way to kind of bring it to life is helping the child create an actual Moses staff. So I'm going to show you here. If you just take a few sheets of construction paper, roll them up, you see that in the top photo, and then just attach them together, you can create a long staff in the bottom right, and that can be held up and used at different moments of the Seder. The significance of the staff is something that Moses used during the plagues, held over the Red Sea. So it gives a physical prop to the child to use during those moments of the story. And it also offers a simple craft for you to do it before the Seder, again, kind of to anticipate what we might do in telling the story, so that you have almost this, this bag of props that you can use during the retelling. Okay, and finally, we have crossing the Red Sea. So there's a couple of ways that I'm going to offer you here to think about this. The first one, I'm going to unshare my screen again. And I'm going to ask you to take a piece of paper. I'm going to take a blue piece of construction paper, but you can take a regular piece of paper that you might have in front of you. And we're going to fold it like a fan. So we're going to take it from one side, and we're just going to make a fold. It's like an inch in, like this. And then you're going to turn it over and then fold back the other way, so that it looks like this, and then turn it over and fold again. So you're basically accordion folding the paper. Turn it over again, and do that all throughout the paper. And this is something that in advance, you could have your grandchild design the sea on it. They can draw sea creatures, they can draw things on the piece of paper. And you would do this with two pieces of paper. When you open it up, you've got your Red Sea, so that when the moment comes, you can split it. And you can create a moment of splitting it and having, they could put their toys through the center, making it look like, if you put it on the Seder table, that you have the Israelites crossing through the sea, and they get to do that magic moment of crossing, of parting the sea with the paper. And if they've designed it in advance, it can look like a little ocean that or a sea that they've created. And then they act out that moment in miniature. So I'll show you an image of that. Another way to do this is with bed sheets, to either do a parachute, lift the grown-ups, lift it up and the kids run underneath. Or let me show you that image on the left. You can actually put the bed sheets on a set of 4 chairs to create a tunnel, so that the whole family or the children could walk through. In this image, you see my son is all over these slides. You see my son playing instrument as he walks through on the left. And then in the image on the right, the family lifting up that sheet and the kids running underneath to symbolize and making the crossing of the Red Sea moment active for the family. Here's what we just created, just a version of it that you can see. So the designed miniature Red Sea and the toys on one side, and then lifting them up and having them walk through and creating that moment in miniature. What's great about this too, and it gives the child a sense, obviously it's not at scale, but it's giving them a sense of scale by having them be big and the moment be small. They kind of get to see it in a bird's eye way. Whereas the bedsheet way, they get to sort of run through the moment and experience it, physically imagining themselves going through. So 2 different perspectives. This is just another fun activity, kind of as a water experiment. In that first image, I told my son to try to part the water using a spatula, see if he could make the water go into 2 sections, right? And when you try, obviously, you can't, right? As hard as you try, you can't do it. So it kind of gives that sense of what does it mean to part the water, a physical, tangible, experience. And then on the right image, lining up cubes of ice, which, many imagine the crossing, the parting of the Red Sea as the water freezing. Water changes, obviously, its properties, right? When it operates differently when it's ice, and you can move it into 2 walls and walk through. So again, this is something you could do before the Seder or during, just as another way to illustrate this moment. And again, we have a sensory connection. So we wash our hands again right before we have the meal, and we eat the matzah, which you can connect to this idea of, again, of washing our hands, imagining right before the seas parted. That image of walking in before the seas actually parted, that the Israelites walked in and then the water split, and then the image of eating the matzah as a symbol of freedom, right? That they ran away quickly. They had only the matzah with them, and that taking that first bite of matzah, imagining ourselves as free. Again, making connections between the things we are doing in the Seder to the story, which is really the centerpiece of what we want the children to remember. Okay, so let's pause there for a moment. I know that was a lot of information. I'll pause there for questions before I give you a couple of other suggestions and ideas. Just looking through. Yeah, so great questions, in terms of practice. Obviously, some of the things I'm showing would not work for a Shomer, Shabbat, or certain families that have the traditions of not doing that on the actual holiday. So there are definitely ways to modify. There's some great suggestions coming in the chat, and also ways to create things in advance. For Diane's suggestion, I think a lot of the things that I'm showing now would work for 3 to 4 year olds, especially the physical, tangible stuff. There are ways to kind of tell the story in very simple moments, but that because we're talking about sensory connection and, kind of physical things that you can do at the table, they might make a memory or a story moment out of one of the things I'm sharing. And so I think, we did all of these things with our 3-4 year old. Obviously, maybe I wouldn't cover the whole story. I would only talk about certain moments. But the more active you can make it, I think, the more engaging it'll be for even the youngest child. Gary said, yeah, great question, Gary. So, a lot of Haggadah don't cover some parts of what we're talking about now. This is the sort of the full arc of the Exodus story, right? And often, depending on the Haggadah you use, it's written, as I was saying before, some of them are written, as commentary on the story, kind of imagining the family might already know the story at the time that the Haggadah was composed. So many Haggadot bring in the full story of the Exodus. You can also add these things or find a way to weave it in. That you can also find, we'll talk about it in a little bit, find a Haggadah that's more kid-friendly, that tells the full arc of the story in a way that's more introductory, that would cover these moments.
Jonathan, there's a question about whether you are willing or plan to send out your slides afterwards, or they may be proprietary, so how would you respond to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to share the slides, after the session for those who were registered. And we'll also have the recording, which you can reference the slides through that as well. The slides will be a part of the recording. I love this suggestion from Lee about, creating stations for the progression of the story. That's a great way to do it, rather than having it all be centered around the table, to create kind of movement around the house. Or the room, to create different stations. That would be a really fun idea. Okay, great suggestions coming in the chat. Thank you for participating. I'm going to give you a few more things to think about now, outside of the details of the story. So a couple of other activity ideas. This is an activity that could be aged up or down, but the idea of sort of packing your suitcase, imagining you're leaving, kind of contemporizing it. If you had to leave tomorrow, what's one thing that you would take? If you had to pack quickly, what would you put in your suitcase? And it could generate interesting conversation for the kids and the parents and the grandparents at the table. So that could be something that you, even as a younger kid activity, draw a suitcase on a piece of paper and have them draw inside of it, or it could just be a conversation. The hiding of the afikomen, one way to make it connected to the story, or something that, kind of heightening it a little bit, and you could create a treasure map together. So, this is something where, different families have different traditions of who hides the afikomen and who finds it. But it could be something where the grandparents and the kids collaborate on choosing a spot and actually creating a treasure map to find the afikomen around the house. That you can imagine is a journey out of Egypt that either the parents have to take, or some other grownups at the table who have to find it, or it could be that you design one for the child to find. But rather than just saying, go find it around the house, charting a map and a treasure with an X marks the spot is a fun way to center it, and something that even the youngest child would kind of get excited about with a map, rather than kind of feel a little amorphous just putting it somewhere in the house and saying go. So just one way to think about making the afikomen an adventure. Another idea, the moment of the Seder when we open the door for Elijah, it's something, especially with older kids, thinking, everybody thinking about one way that they'll be welcoming to someone else in the coming year. One way that you're going to, metaphorically open your door to someone in your life, or ways that you'll be welcoming, and having each person share that. Again, as a way to bring it back to the learning, back to today and back to themselves, and connecting the actions of the Seder to their lives. Yes, exactly, Nancy. I think for the families that want to go there are clear connections here to, connecting to the situation in Ukraine, and thinking about, that forced exodus. And it's something that families can definitely, if they want to, make those connections for sure with some of these activities that we're talking about. Okay, and choosing a Haggadah. So, this came up in questions in advance of the session. We're not going to recommend specific ones, but just some tips to be thinking about. There are many out there, that prioritize visual storytelling. Obviously, you want to think about length and ways that there's actual engagement in the Haggadah itself. There are many that have, engagement built in for children. And personally, I think the ones that center the story, as the kind of the most important centerpiece. If you think about one thing you want even the youngest child to walk away with, I believe that we want them to walk away with the why of the holiday, right? Why do we celebrate this? What story are we commemorating, as the way we develop memory and connection to the Passover Seder itself? Something to think about with the 4 questions. Some Haggadot deal with this well, others don't, specifically talk about it. But the 4 questions as an invitation to ask questions, right? The 4 questions are framed as what is different, how is tonight different than all other nights? But they can be an invitation to center the Seder around children asking questions. So how can you frame that as an invitation at the beginning of the Seder, saying, if the child has any questions throughout, they should be asking them, and we should be answering them, as a way that we move through the Seder. And then, I would say, from both experience and talking to people as we plan this, practicing and teaching a few key songs will be helpful. A lot of families kind of open up the Haggadah and remember, oh, right, how does this one go? And trying to teach it while you have your grandchildren there. So practice ahead of time, think through, and that goes for all of us, right? Intentionality and practice in terms of what you're going to do at each moment will lead to a more engaging Seder. So maybe in advance, thinking about the few key songs that you want to teach, whether it's Dayenu or Haggadah, and practicing them in a way that you'll be able to teach them to the children at your Seder table. And then just offering a resource, Haggadot.com is a great one. It's a free resource where you can build your own Haggadah, and you can take different components and put them together. You can print them directly from the site. So if you're interested in kind of customizing your own Haggadah, it's a great online resource to be able to do that.
Excuse me, Jonathan. I just want to say that the Jewish Grandparents Network has created, actually it's been a few years, it's called the Diana Seder. It's literally a 10-minute Seder. And it's in Haggadot.com as well. And it's actually their most downloaded Haggadah each year. So I'll put the link in chat.
It's fantastic. It's a great resource because it also offers, what each person says. I love the arc of that 10-minute Seder. The 10-minute Haggadah, I mean. Okay. And then a couple of suggestions if you're on Zoom or FaceTime, recognizing that not everybody is going to be in the room together. This is obviously a huge challenge. None of these suggestions, solve the problem completely, but some ideas to think about. All the craft ideas that we talked about can be something that you do one-on-one on the screen before the Seder as a way to prep. It's a way to connect even on screen before you start. And it's something that you can lead. You can make your own things the way I did tonight while your grandchild makes them too. And in that way, you're sort of prepping all the materials together virtually before you get started. Obviously, keeping it short with trying to engage both with the screen and in person, and thinking about which components you really want to do with everybody on the computer, and live together. If you're comfortable with it, screen share, like I'm doing right now, is a great feature. It's something where you can bring things to the Seder, whether it's images, or things you find online that you want to share as part of the Seder, that you can screen share. And then the computer becomes a tool like part of the Haggadah that everybody's looking at, not just your face at the table, but it's a tool that you can use to offer things at the Seder itself. You could also put the whole Haggadah up there that way, and that way everybody's kind of looking up rather than looking down, a way for you to lead that way. You can also narrate the way that, that we were talking about the narration and the acting out of the story. The person who's on Zoom can narrate while the people in the room act it out. And that's a way for, the person on Zoom and the people in the room to have two roles that complement each other, that need each other as the Seder goes through. So certain of moments, those theatrical moments you can do together. Oh, Maxine, the tape was for the burning bush, to be able to tape the lantern together. And then, this is not just a tip for Zoom or FaceTime. It's if you're in person too. If you bring a spirit of play, if you play along too, everybody will play. The idea that the grown-ups should be playing too. It's not just about the kids playing, and that they will have more fun. They will be engaged if you're engaged in playing along and being silly at these moments and acting things out along with them.
I have a question.
Okay. Yeah.
Have you or seen people an experience like dressing up for the Seder, dressing up as Moses or dressing up as a Pharaoh? It just seems to me that might be a nice kind of addition or feature.
It's a great idea. Yeah, I mean, I think if having people in costume or getting into it, anything you can do to kind of bring the story, to life and acting it out as if you were there, it's a great idea to be able to incorporate costume, or even, using things around the house. Like if, even if you don't necessarily have costumes that you source, can you think about, if we were to use the stuff we have in the house, bed sheets and towels, how can we create the costume of Egyptians or Israelites, and, being creative with paper or objects around the house. And in that way, you let the children guide too. If you show them an image of, let's say, even an image from one of the visual Haggadot, and you say, how can we make that as a costume with what we have? It gets back to what Terry showed with that resource in the beginning from the family room, letting the children guide a visual craft activity. That's not something that you just give them, but that they can lead the creation of and make. Any other questions?
Jonathan,
Yeah.
I got a question earlier in the day to my email from somebody who couldn't participate tonight. And it was a little actually painful. This is what she said. May I read it to you?
Yeah, please.
She said, how do you introduce some Seder fun when your adult children feel that your 5-year-old grandchild needs a very, very truncated experience? The parents feel the child will be bored and can't sit through songs or more content. This is especially difficult when we know that the games will work and we can make sure the child is involved and that this child is very responsive and bright and energetic. In other words, there's a disconnect between the grandparents and the parents about how long and how much the Seder can be. Can you help?
Yeah, that's tough. I mean, a couple of suggestions. I think, being prepared, that if I'm hearing the story correctly, it comes a little bit out of fear of the child being antsy, not wanting to participate, feeling like it's going to just kind of having the preconceived notion that it's going to be too long. So I think, if the grandparent, whoever, is leading, really sits down to prepare, how long is each thing going to take? What is my, agenda? That's what a Seder is, right? The Seder is the order of all the steps that we do. And there's a more modern educational tool called a social story. Sort of the same idea, right? It's saying, here are all the things we're going to do so that you're prepared, you know how long it's going to be, and that way you can participate. And in some ways, both the parent and the child need that, right? We are going to do these 5 activities. It's going to take us, 30 minutes. And here's, you can trust me because I know how long, each thing is going to be. And also being willing to be flexible. If you're trying something out and the child is really not having it, being willing to move forward, and not being rigid about the plan if it isn't working. So those are just a few suggestions that I would offer.
Thank you. Is there anything else you wanted to share, Jonathan?
Yeah, so with a few more minutes, I just wanted to share quickly a resource for you that I created called Kailu Kits, which is a way to make, to enhance the theatricality even further, whether it's for your Seder or, for those who are observant in a way that you wouldn't use these tools during the holiday itself, either before or during Chol HaMoed. So Kailu Kits are basically interactive theatrical adventures using a lot of the tools that we talked about, but set to an audio track. Think of it like a radio play with actors and sound effects and music, but the audio track tells you what to do. So the voice on the track will say, we're running with Miriam down to the Nile, take 5 steps forward, and then you hear Miriam's voice. So it's a way to kind of create, without a screen, listening to the story and acting it out. It comes with a few components. So the whole kit is $18. You download the whole thing online, so you don't need to wait for anything in the mail. It comes with the audio track, which runs about 25-30 minutes. A story map, which I'll show you in a moment, that charts the journey of the story. The burning bush lantern, a kind of more designed one than the one we created tonight, same idea. And a scavenger hunt of things to collect around the house, like a bed sheet, and a flashlight that you use during the adventure. So this is the story map, and the kids draw an X at each place along the way, and the track tells you when to do it. This is the basket puppet that you create, that you print and create, the burning bush lantern. And it also comes with a visual Haggadah. This is really designed for like the youngest child, this Haggadah, because it basically allows them to lead. They can see in the pictures what happens, and it's all the steps, and incorporates the audio as the storytelling component. So that the whole Seder takes about 40 minutes together, and it has questions to ask along the way. So the kit is really designed for like 3 to 8-year-olds is the prime audience for it. And again, you purchase it online, you can stream it, print all the things that you need, and then play the audio. And then again, this is something that you can do as part of the Seder, or just as an activity to do with your grandchild. So you can find all the info about that at kailukit.com. That link is on the screen. And I'm also including my email here. Please feel free to email me with any questions. That if you have any questions about our session tonight, or want to ask more about certain ideas, I'm more than happy to be available to answer any other questions that you have. And I'm just thankful for the opportunity to get to present and help you think about your Seder with your grandchildren.
I have a question or a thought. Yeah. It seems to me one of the things that grandparents can think about is that, what are the kind of things that could happen? What are the things you could do with your grandkids outside of the context of the Seder? That you can take pieces of it. That's right. And create activities with your grandkids, to do at home, or just basically so you're kind of maybe taking pieces of the story and sharing them at different times.
That's exactly right. And you can either spread it out as something to anticipate the holiday, something in the lead up, or it can be after, to kind of recall some of the things that happened during the Seder. But yeah, all of these things are, this is a lot of ideas. You can mix and match and take pieces of this that become an afternoon activity, to act out that moment, for sure.
Thank you, Jonathan. First of all, friends, I've put in chat a link to our private Facebook group, the JGN Facebook group. Many of you are already members. Thank you for being part of our community, and we invite all the rest of you to come and join and be part of the loving grandparenting conversation. So, Jonathan, while you were talking, I was getting texts on my phone from a variety of people. He's brilliant. We need to talk. Can he do this? Can he do that? So, and I know you have some big fans among the people who've signed up, including some grandparents, as you described. Thank you 1,000 times over for being here, for presenting for us, and for sharing your magnificent knowledge. And to all of our friends, we so appreciate your coming, and we will be in touch with you about upcoming events. So from the Jewish Grandparents Network, we say good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Passover.